stronger, I probably would do some panic, so I'm not gonna.
I already had a reason.
But again, just as a reminder, right? Submit that foot roll on the
What?
geo that you use for your midterm assignment, right? So you want to try and build out an entire rating, iterating on it. So that's what you'll need to submit for the homework. Again, there's videos up. I think this one's a little bit quicker than our other lessons, especially when it comes to skin weights. So go ahead and blaze through that and get it in before the due date. Second of all, in terms of reminders of the schedule in our housekeeping, right? We're not going to have class next week, so Monday the 8th and Wednesday the 10th. We're not going to be having any class here. I am out and about, so don't come to class. Again, I think I'll set up so our IK switches homework is going on over that time, and it'll be due when we get back the following Monday the 15th. Again, I'll remind us on Wednesday one last time, but we will not have class for me next week. I'm trying to get through one other thing. Oh yes, and then I sent out the app a little bit earlier today, but we might need bonus tools today. If we don't use it today, we'll definitely need it on Wednesday. So do make sure that you have bonus tools downloaded and installed. I think Autodesk site is up now after a few weeks of downtime. I got a couple of nods, so that tells me that it's going well. And Emily asked if my app to be open or closed when you install it. To be safe, go ahead and keep it closed. See, we have information over here. Because again, not just Maya, but many programs, when you install plugins to them, get a little picky when they're open and you install stuff to them. So I want you to kind of keep in mind that. So this is now our IK-FK switches lecture. I'll talk about what that is and what that looks like, and then we can go ahead and delve into the mechanics. So when I'm talking about an IK-FK switch, especially if you've animated before, you've seen the ability to move between both IK inverse kinematics mode and FK forward kinematics mode on the same rig. That's what we're taking a look at, right? So hopefully by the end of Wednesday, if not today, we'll make it so that we can use an IK controller to bend and manipulate our hand, but also build a control to switch it into FK. So if we need to use IK or FK, our animators have the option of using either or. And I think maybe both if I put it in a bad value. Yeah, you can even do blend between the two. But again, it's kind of a complicated setup, as I will put this open only to intimidate you visually. Here's what our node editor is going to look like when we're done. I promise it's actually not that bad. We're linking just like 6 things up. But again, it is a lot, and I kind of want to explain what's going on under the hood. So when we build it together in Maya, you'll understand why that is. And that's where the switches come, where switches get stitches presentation comes in. So again, we're going to be setting up a control system that allows us to jump between those two types. So what you need for this to work right is technically just need a regular arm. In this example, I have some twists built into that, but we can go back and build those later if we have time to do so. But you really just need one regular arm chain. We have our clavicle here, we have our shoulder, our elbow, our wrist, into all of our other hand stuff. But you just need, a regular arm setup. The way that it's going to work is we're going to create 2 separate arms, one that has IK controls on it and another that has FK controls on it. And they're both going to sit on top of or be right inside of that original arm shape. So once we have those duplicated chains, we're not going to actually move them, I just pull them out to sort of show what they're doing there. But again, they're simplified, so we just have a shoulder, elbow, and wrist for both these control types. We're going to put them inside each other on top of the original arm, and we're going to constrain them to it, right? So the idea here is when we're doing our constraints, we'll need to make sure that we grab our regular arm joint last. We're going to have 2 parents in our parent constraint. It's a real bona fide nuclear American household up in here today. But you'll constrain both of those IK and FK arms that you create to your original arm. Maintain offset will be off, right? But basically there are 2 parents here. And again, it behaves a lot like our twist joint setup. Then when we start to build out our control, this is what we're actually changing under the hood. So if you select any one of these little red chain link options, these parent constraints, and take a look in the channel box, you can see the number of targets are basically the options that have, or the parents that are operating on the constrained object. So if we see here on the right image, there's an LTFK risk W1 and LTIK risk W0. Those are both parents or people that have weight or influence over the child or our main joint chain. Again, very even household. Both parents have 50-50 control over the child. But we're going to modify and alter those values so when the weight of one of those is set to 0, only one of them will have 100% control. And we can flip it around so only the other one has 100% control and the alternative one has 0, right? So that's kind of what our setup is going to look like. Is that for all of our wrists, our elbows, and our shoulders, we're going to be modifying that IKW0 or FKW1 values. We're going to automate with the control that we built up. We're going to switch them between 0 and 1, which controls how that parent constraint is working. So then when we're set to, in this instance, my FK wrists are all set to 1 and all my IK options are set to 0. That means nothing from my IK control chain will be affecting it, and only my regular FK will instead control the arm. And if you do a roll setup or you build additional controls on top of this is still compatible with it, right? Which is kind of the benefit of rigging, is that as we build controls throughout the class, we can do them at different points. Like, we don't have to build out leg controls for the arm controls to work, right? If we want to do an IK spine setup later, we totally could. So if we do end up going back and adding some twist and roll joints, it's absolutely possible. If you need to make other adjustments like to skin weights or other things, you can also do that without sort of ruining the setup. Because again, if you think about our deform systems and our motion control system, the motion control system are those joints that we're setting up today, control our regular deform. So when all those are set to those correct weights, only one control type will work as opposed to the other. And the last thing that we'll do after that is we'll create a custom curve on it. I have a little gear cog here where we can create our own attributes, right? It'll just be IK, FK in either 0 or 1, that value that we're going to plug into the controls that we build, and that's what causes it to flip and jump between those two types. So again, with that 0 and 1, we can link it up through the node editor. In terms of new stuff for the node editor, we're going to be taking a look at the reverse node, which does exactly that. That means if my IK, FK is 0 and I reverse it, it'll be 1. And if I set it to 1, it'll reverse it to 0. That's what allows us to switch between both of these types. And then as we're doing our cleanup and our other conventions here, we'll make it so that we can't see our IK controls when it's only FK in use, and that our IK joints are also hidden when FK is in use, and vice versa, right? So all of those changes that we're going to be making and sort of linking up to our node editor hinge upon that IK, FK attribute. So we'll create our own little curve and I'll create custom attributes to drive that. So again, if we take a moment to look at our node editor here.
Oh my god.
All of these cords going into everything is coming out of my IK, FK control, right? So the sort of key to making this work is having our own control with that IK, FK value on it. So again, we're going to get an option that allows us to use our FK controls or switch it over to our IK controls. And the neat part about this as well is that the control actually preserves where it was when you set it off. So you can sort of toggle between the two really easily. Alright, so that's sort of the explanation. Again, I know it's a little bit heady, which is why I wanted us to get introduced to that idea. We'll go ahead and take a look at one of our rigs that we've built here and start to build out the system ourselves. So we'll go ahead and grab one of my files and get started. I think this is my foot roll. So again, the only thing we really need for this to work is just some arm joints. Even if this isn't skins to the model, as long as you have a shoulder, an elbow, and a wrist, this setup will still work. I'll go ahead and use Save As to save a copy. Close my IKFK, Monday, Wednesday. Fine. So we really don't need to worry about any other setups aside from just jumping into it and duplicating our arms. So again, we have to start by creating some duplicated and simplified arms, one that's named FK and one that's named IK. So go ahead and come over to your model, grab your shoulder joint on one side of the body, bless you. Again, I try to work on the left side versus the right sides, so I'll try and mirror this over when it's about done. And with this joint selected, go ahead and come over to your outliner and hit F with the cursor hovering over the outliner. That way it will jump your current outliner selection to that actual joint. So I've got my LT shoulder. What I'm going to go ahead and do now is I'm going to duplicate this twice. So I'm going to have one for my IK setup, right, and one for my FK setup. So I'm not grabbing the collarbone, I'm actually starting with the shoulder. And with that selected, I'll use the Control D or Command D commands to duplicate it one time and a second time. And for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to pull these out of the hierarchy to work on them just to make it a little bit easier for us to mess with. So with both of these shoulders selected, you can use the Shift P as in parent command to remove them out of the hierarchy. You can also just hold down middle mouse and drag and release, right? Both of those work. I just want them to be outside of the hierarchy. So I'll select those. Again, we only need a simplified setup, so we don't need any of the extra hand joints, the finger joints, none of that. We really just need the elbow, shoulder, and wrist. So go ahead and come on in to these duplicated joint chains. And just delete everything below the wrist. So I'll delete my LT hand, my LT thumb on these duplicated chains. Again, your model's appearance shouldn't be changing because we duplicated and pulled out those joints. That shouldn't be the joints that are skins to our model, right? So if you end up unparenting one of these joints and things start to get a little bit weird, I don't think it would actually. You see something like starts to like rotate in or fall in on itself, step back, Control D, make sure that you're grabbing the correct set of duplicated chains. But again, I'll make sure that I don't have anything underneath my LT wrist for these duplicated chains. LT.
So we delete hand and delete thumb.
Hmm?
We delete the hand and the thumb of the ITs.
Yes, usually the hand and thumb of those new ones that you created. While we're here, we should also go ahead and rename these joints because now that we're dealing with several joints with very similar names, we'll go ahead and use the comment rename tool to add some changes to our names. So we might make this LT FK shoulder, LT IK shoulder. So I'm going to head up to my rigging shelf and pop open my comment rename tool. Love this guy. I'll tell it to search for basically the name of my joints and replace it with the name of the LT or the FK or IK attached to it. So I'm searching for LT underscore. I'll tell comment rename to instead replace this with LT underscore FK underscore. And we'll do the exact same thing, right, but we'll do LT IK for the other joints chain. It doesn't matter which one you designate as FK and IK because we don't have anything set up yet. That's fine, that's okay. Just go ahead and rename them anyway so you can start to keep track of which joints need which control. So I'll select them, use search and replace, and I have LT FK shoulder, and I'll get rid of that too because it's annoying. Again, I'll repeat this step for the other set of joints, so I'll have an LT IK shoulder just as well. So I'll highlight these guys, comment over and search and replace for LT underscore IK underscore instead. And run search and replace. And get rid of that one line act. So again, this is kind of the setup that we need to have happen. This is what we need to have for this control type to work because we're going to be setting up some parent constraints here next. So like I mentioned before, after we've gotten our IK and FK shoulder chains or simplified chains set up, we do need to constrain them to the original arm so we can actually have these control types operate on our arm and choose it, or make it deform and then skin and bend, and all those wonderful things that we've done before. Because we're going to have to skin our original shoulder, do go ahead and come up to your outliner and mouse through your deformation system until you find your regular LT shoulder, elbow, and wrist. Again, these are all going to be the targets of our parent constraints. So we need to basically grab each joint and then set up a constraint, right? So we'll do IK shoulder, then FK shoulder, and then I'll make sure that I grab my LT shoulder last before I create my parent constraint. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to be using purely the outliner to select this because these joints are inside each other. It's going to be really hard to select them. So I'm going to grab my IK shoulder first, hold down the control key, and grab my FK shoulder next. I'm holding down the function key, so it didn't grab multiples. Terrible loss. Then while also holding down control, I'm going to grab my regular shoulder last. Again, you could grab this in IK then FK. It doesn't matter as long as you're grabbing your LT shoulder last. We're thinking about our parent constraint rules. The parent constrains the child. So anything that we select last will be the recipient of our parent constraint. So then selected, go ahead and come up to your constrain menu. And if you don't see this here, make sure that your menu set is set to rigging. Come down to parent constraint and hop into that options window. In theory, this should not matter what we're about to do. However, for the sake of being paranoid and good stewards of our rig, go ahead and turn off maintain offset. And because they're inside each other, they shouldn't offset or change anyways, but we want to get rid of the offset attribute inside of our parent constraint. And go ahead and hit add. Now you can double check and make sure that this worked. So the hallmarks of this working is that if you look under your LT shoulder, you should find your parent constraint object, that little red chain link. Go ahead and select it and head on over to your channel box. And what we're making sure that we see here is that we have two weight values or two W values. We have our IK shoulder W0 and our FK shoulder W1. Both of them should be set to 1. Don't change those yet. Don't mess with those at all. But you want to make sure that you see both of those joint names that you've constrained to it in here. If you only see one, go ahead and delete your parent constraint or Control Z and make sure that you grab both of those joints first before constraining. Sweet. So we'll go ahead and repeat this step with the elbow and wrist joints as well. So coming over to my outliner, I'll grab my IK elbow first, hold down Control, grab my FK elbow next, and then grab my LT elbow last. And then we can run the parent constraint option again. We don't have to go in the options box this time because we turned off maintain offset. That option is still there. Go ahead and constrain it. Parent. And do double check on that elbow parent constraint that these are the same. Again, be careful. When you look at these two different constraints, it's probably better to try and constrain these in the same order, right? So if my IK is on top and my FK is on the bottom, I'm going to look at my other parent constraint and make sure my IK is on top and FK is on the bottom. That's not necessary, but again, it'll be a lot easier for our setup later. We won't have to like get our wires crossed basically when we start to use the node editor here to manipulate this. All right. Last but not least, let's go ahead and bring our wrists together. So I'll grab my IK wrist first, Control click my FK wrist next, and grab my LT wrist last. And again, constrain it up. And again, do just double check and make sure that those are kind of in the same order. Again, you really just need to make sure that both of them are weighted there, but I do highly recommend that you set them up in the same order because it's best practice. All right, so with that out of the way, we're just about done adding new objects technically. But we can test and make sure that our system is working. To do so, go ahead and change to your rotate tool and select either your FK or IK shoulder. We don't have any control set up on this, so we'll just kind of manually manipulate it. If I grab my FK shoulder, change to my rotate tool, and rotate it out, I should start to get this kind of weird ghosty thing. And the deformations in my elbow are even getting a little strange, and that's okay. But again, if we're thinking about what's happening with our parent constraints, because that W value, that weight value is the same, they're both 1, it's splitting that influence over our original joint to kind of 50-50. So if I move my, rotate Y joint, we'll say negative 90 degrees on our FK. On our regular shoulder, it should be negative 45, so about half as strong. And on our IK shoulder, it shouldn't have moved at all. So we're going to change which parent our original arm is listening to and have it switch between the two. So it's a good way to test is just grab one of these joint chains and rotate it. It should sort of do a little halfway thing. Again, it will look horrifying and incorrect, but that's okay. Bless you. So I'll use Control Z to step back until these are again inside each other. And again, it's just another way for us to check and double and really make sure that our setup is correct. All right, now comes for the fun part. Go ahead and run a save if you haven't already. Next up, we need to create a control that has a custom attribute on it. It's that IK FK switch. And then we'll head into the node editor to start to link these up. Like every good custom control that we make here in our rigging class, let's go ahead and create a custom curve for this. And we'll build our attribute on this curve. Again, I want us to be good stewards, and in this case, because we're not linking this up to anything, we don't really need to worry about the offset groups or the freeze transforms and all that stuff, because it really only exists to hold one attribute, but we'll again just try and practice that to make sure. So go ahead and come up to your VS Curves menu. Again, any curve will work for this, but I want to grab a specific curve because I think it'll look cool. And I'm just going to look for a one arrow, so just a single arrow, and I'll have it basically point out my wrist here when it's time to clean up. So I'll scroll through my list here. If I type O in this list, it'll jump me to one arrow. Very cool. And I'll put it on the origin. Again, if you want to do 2 arrows or a curve of 4 arrows or a little gear cog shape, totally up to you. Do whatever you think would work best to represent this idea. Again, based off of like how the bowing rig works and how other ones, I really like having a control that just points towards the wrist for a IKFK control. With that, go ahead, or with that created, go ahead and close your VS controls. Let's do our typical like naming conventions because we're really good grammarists. We'll make this my LT, IK, FK, switch, CTL. I'll go ahead and throw it under a group with a very similar naming convention as well. Right? So with that highlighted, I'll use Control G to hide it. I'll call this my LT, IK, FK, switch, GRP. If you want to work a little bit faster than me and not be a dummy, you could just copy and paste that text and just change those last 3 letters. And again, we'll probably just end up locking and hiding these translate and rotate and scale attributes, so we really don't have to worry too much about like our maintain offsets or any of that. But again, just for the sake of practice, I'll go ahead and grab my group, hit my move tool, and I'll just bring this up towards the wrist. So with my move tool up, I can hold down V and use that to snap to my wrist. If you're really good and precise, you can. If not, you might want to hide your geo and use that to snap to the different joints. And go ahead and position it how you would like. Obviously, an arrow just intersecting in the middle of the wrist doesn't make a lot of sense. So I'm also just going to push this back and flip it around. Why am I on gimbal? Okay. And rotate this around 180 degrees. This way it's kind of like pointing at my wrist, right? So it's like here. Question?
Some reason is creating the arrows but not showing it up in the program. I don't know why.
Whoa. Let's make sure you're not isolate selected. That might be it.
Yeah, I got the arrow.
I wonder if you hit curves in your animation class. So go up to the show menu and hit all.
Yeah.
You probably hit that to like play left something, I guess.
Unless I'm happy, I'm working in animation.
Yeah. Sweet, we got our little arrow positioned. Again, this is just kind of like line it up. In theory, you really just need a curve anywhere that has that attribute for us, but I, again, like us to kind of practice, good, or best practices with our rig. And if you're really feeling like you want to keep this clean, go ahead and freeze transforms on your group. You might as well. Hold up to modify and freeze transformations. Again, this is just to keep things looking nice and clean for us. So we've got a curve here, just like we did with our foot controls, right? We created a curve and built our own attributes on that. We'll do the same thing with our arrow that's pointing towards the wrist, but we'll set up our attribute a little bit differently. We'll need some limitations on it. So go ahead and select your curve itself, the CTL, the thing that used to hold our attribute that our animators will mess with. And let's go ahead and make a new attribute. As a reminder, you can come over to the attribute editor or hit Control A to find it. Come up to the attributes drop down and add attribute. You can also, with that selected, just come up to modify can come down to add attribute just as well. I didn't learn about this until like a few months ago. My mind was blown. But we do need to make some changes here to our attribute that we're adding. The big one is that we need to just set a minimum and maximum of 0 and 1. Because our switch can only be on and off, right? It can't be on +3. That wouldn't make a lot of sense. And our setup will get a little bit weird. So under our numeric attribute properties, let's make sure that we set the minimum to 0 and the maximum to 1. This also makes it so when we add our reverse node, it will know to only operate within the bounds of 0 and 1 at the same time. Our other attributes should be the same, but do make sure you're doing the float type. And go ahead and set a long name and a nice name.
Wouldn't Boolean do the same thing?
Boolean would not do the same thing because outputting false does not necessarily output 0 in the node editor.
Okay.
I think it could if you put it through a conversion node, but at that point, you might as well just done a number in the first place. Good question though.
I'm wondering, is this kind of like, do you remember the dynamic we use for animation? And remember we have this switch for IK, but for the, I think it was for the legs.
It was for the arms and the legs, and this is exactly that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. For my long name, I'll go ahead and do like LT, IK, FK, switch, CTL. Really leaning into the long part of the long name here. Again, this does have to be like grammatically correct, so spaces and special characters might not work. But I can override the nice name here with an IK or FK. Or do IK/FK, or do IK/FK switch. Entirely up to you, right? I'll just make this my IK/FK. But if you think animators can be big dummies and they don't know what's going on, you could add the word switch. And then once this is set up, we're good to go ahead and hit OK, and we have our attribute added. Again, a good way to double check this is that if you hop into your channel box, you just hold down left mouse inside the field with the number. So if you hover it over to 0, just drag it left and right. It should clip to only 0 and 1, no matter how much you wiggle your mouse around. So again, 0 will be off, 1 will be on. We need to have it be limited to those values. So now the stage is set, right? We have created our constraints where we'll need to alter those weight values, those W values. We've actually created something to drive them. The next thing is going to be to link them up in our node editor. So we'll bring in our curve itself, as well as those parent constraint chain links, and we'll start to link these together in our node editor. So with your curve selected, go ahead and come up to the Windows menu, down to node editor. Maya just threw a random syntax error out. Cool, man, great. Ooh, look at this. This is not what I want. I'm leaving.
This is so empty.
If you don't want to do that, you can also hit the clear graph button. It looks like there's little sparkles. And then I'll go ahead and add it. Again, you can middle mouse drag it, or with that selected, hit the add selected nodes to graph button. So our RKFK switch is in here. Again, we don't need to deal with the shape. Goodbye shape. Go away shape. And if we click on this little stack of pancakes, that hamburgers, that gives us access to our IKFK attribute, every attribute that's on this particular node. Now we need to find our parent constraints, add them to this node graph as well, and link this IKFK value to those weight values, those W1 and those W0 values. I'll minimize this for now. Go ahead and grab my wrist parent constraints. I'll hold down shift and grab the elbow and shoulder parent constraints. If you don't see your wrist parent constraint, by the way, you may need to just open up your wrist joint and see it underneath there. I'll use shift to grab all of them.
Play.
And I'll middle mouse drag this into my node editor. Again, you can also, with those selected, hit that add selected nodes graph button. Great. So now we've got these 3 dudes in here. We're ready to start piping in their attributes and controlling them. We can go ahead and expand each of their menus and look for the attributes that we want to connect. Now, there's a lot going on here, right? The parent constraint is a very complicated little piece of Maya node work. Oh, okay. once you open these menus up fully, go ahead and look down and see if you can't find your LT FK wrist and LT IK wrist weight values. So W1s and W0s. And make sure that you can find them for all three of these parent constraints. So from here on out, it's pretty simple, right? We're going to end up connecting these to our IK FK attribute. But we are going to use that reverse node. So for now, we're only going to move our IK FK into one type. When it's going to be one type, I just basically want you to say, if you're dragging your IK FK into your IK wrist, put them into the other IK wrists, don't put them into the FK constraints after that. So I'll take out of my IK FK node and drag it into my LT IK wrist W0. I'll then grab from that node, and you can put it into the IK elbow W0. And then I'll take it out and put it into my IK shoulder W0. So now all three of these have been sort of separately connected to
Yeah, okay.
our switch setup. In theory, if you wanted to, you could also grab the outputs on the actual nodes themselves and link them to their neighbor if you wanted to. This does the exact same thing. I'm just old-fashioned, so I do it the other way. It's entirely up to you. So let's go ahead and go back and double check and see if this is working. Go ahead and select any one of these parent constraints here in your node editor and minimize the window. Head to your channel box, and you should see now in the parent constraints options, one of those weight values, one of those W0 values, has a yellow box, so our node editor is affecting it, and it's set to 0. So now this means any of my IK joints aren't affecting my arm at all. Which conversely means if I move my FK shoulder, or my FK joints, it should move the whole arm. So let's test it out. I'll head back to my outliner right quick, grab my FK shoulder, and rotate it. It should rotate as we'd expect it to, right? With all of our not so great skin weights, at least if you're me. But it should sort of move as we expect it to. Again, I'm grabbing those FK joints from the outliner itself. I'm not trying to click and grab them from the viewport because you might end up grabbing the regular old joint. Cool. So it looks like this is working. I'll go ahead and set all those rotations back to 0. And we can build the other half of our switch. Because right now, we need to control both of these weight values, not just one. So right now, if we change that from 0 to 1, it'll be back to our sort of halfway weird, awful deforming thing. Let's go ahead and head back into our node editor. And we're going to add that new node that I was talking about, the reverse node. So this time we'll take our IKFK, put it into the reverse node, and then take the reverse node into those other slots that we haven't touched yet. So the quickest way to grab your reverse node is to just tap the tab key inside your node editor and type reverse. But if not, you can hold down the right mouse, come up to create node, and manually search for reverse this. When you're looking for icons, if you're using the create node menu, it's going to look like this little like inverted Photoshop mask icon. But if you just spell out reverse straight up in the tab menu, it will also just give you reverse. Go ahead and click it to add this to your node graph. Close your create node menu. Now we have a reverse 1. I'll again open up its options. And just like with our multiply divide for our feet in the node editor, we do have these little plus icons for input and output. Let's make sure that we open those up because we are working with a single float, not a vector. And we'll kind of do like with our multiply divide, right? We'll take our IKFK into our input x, and then we'll link our output x to those other weight values. So I'll grab from my IKFK, put it into input x, find my output x, and drag this into my wrist weight for my wrist, the elbow, and the shoulder. Again, same deal, if you wanted to link them up, right up against each other, you could also do that, entirely the same idea. So what's happening here is the reverse node is looking at our IK/FK variable. It's saying, okay, this could really only be two things according to my channel box, 0 or 1. So if I'm getting 0 out from my regular node, the reverse will flip it to a 1. And then if I set it to 1 on my control, the reverse will flip it to 0. So let's go ahead and head back to our viewport. We'll grab one of these parent constraints first to again see if our work is correct. And look at our channel box. If all is set up correctly, right, now we should have two yellow boxes, so our node editor is affecting both values, but one is set to 0 and the other is set to 1. So again, it looks like my FK shoulder has the weight here, so if I grab my FK shoulder and rotate it, it does work. But now I'll come to my new attribute, that custom curve that I set up. Set my IK/FK to 1. And if I grab my FK shoulder and rotate it, nothing should happen. Grab my IK shoulder and noodle with it, it now will work. So this is the basis or the idea behind setting up the IK/FK switch. We can now sort of dynamically control which parent it listens to and have it change up whenever we want. Now this truly is like a very simple custody case, right? I can just set it to 0 on the weekends and 1 to every other Wednesday.
Is the FK shoulder still supposed to move the hand? 'Cause mine moves my hand too.
But nothing else?
No.
So only thing that's moving? I'm getting two nods from your.
Well, yeah, the hand's moving.
The arm is not.
The arm is
Just the
not.
hand.
So if just the hand is moving, I might double check and make sure for your wrist constraint that the wires didn't end up getting crossed, right? So you might have taken the reverse node and put it into your IK or FK or vice versa. So you'll probably have to flip those around. Want me to come take a look? Or y'all good? So our switch is set up, right?
Yeah. Dude, I'm so good.
Looking good, but we do still have some quality of life things. We still need to build controls on each of these, right? So we need to build controls for our FK shoulders, elbows, and wrists, and for our IK shoulders, elbows, and wrists. And I do want to make it so that when one joint chain is active, we hide the other one that's not. So let's test and make sure we sort of know which mode that we're in, right? So my IK and FK is set to 1. If I grab my IK shoulder and rotate it and move it with it, I'm in IK mode, right? So if I'm in IK mode, that means I want my FKs to be hidden. Boy, I'm saying IK and FK a lot today. It's not confusing at all. So what I'll go ahead and do is I'll grab my FK shoulders, or basically the joints that I don't want to be in operation right now. And because of how hierarchy works, right, if I hide one visibility, it should hide the whole chain. We'll just pipe this IK/FK switch into the visibility option for our FK shoulder. So I'll grab my FK shoulder. I'll go ahead and add it to my node editor, that add selected nodes to graph button. And put it way off here. Thank you for that. Oh, I rearranged my thing. Bummer.
Wait, what did you grab?
I grabbed my FK shoulder joint. I'm going to open up my FK shoulder joint. And in this case, right, if I'm in IK mode, I want my FK shoulder to be hidden. Thinking about what's happening in our node editor, if my switch is set to 1 or on, that means the reverse node is going to flip that to 0. So if I pump in a value of 0 into the visibility of my FK shoulder, it will be hidden. So I'll grab my output X from my reverse node and drag that into the visibility attribute of my FK shoulder. Release. Now if we want to double check and make sure everything worked well in the outliner, my FK shoulder is now hidden, right? And because of how hierarchy works, when that visibility is off, everything underneath it as a child is turned off.
Can you do that one more time?
Yeah. For the joint itself. Yeah, so you bring your joints into the node editor. We'll go ahead and expand its options. And in this case, right, it's my FK shoulder that I don't want to see. So I'll take the output X of my reverse and put that into the visibility of the FK shoulder.
Thank you.
Patrick, do you have a question?
Yep.
What's up?
I'm stuck with the same stuff. I'm trying to connect it, the ITFK shoulder to the visibility one, but it's not like letting it.
Oh, yeah. So see how this one has two full bubbles, but there's
Oh,
one.
qué boludo.
Open it up and
Got
yeah,
it.
visibility. Money.
Thank you. Been a long day.
And we can bring the same idea into our IK joint,
Yeah.
right? But this
That
time, as
was
opposed to
fast.
connecting it to the reverse, I'll just connect it to the switch straight up. So I'm gonna minimize my node editor, grab my IK shoulder joint, and add it to my node editor. I'll again just find its visibility by opening up the entire menu. And this time again, I'll take it directly from the node. I'm not going to use the reverse node and put it into the visibility. So if I'm on IK mode, right, my IK joints should be visible and my FK joint should be hidden. If I switch my switch, then my IK shoulder will be hidden and my FK shoulder will be visible. So the idea here is the one that's visible should be the one that works when you rotate and move it around. You'll have to kind of keep track of it, right? But if that ends up getting flipped around, you just need to make sure you're either disconnecting it from the reverse node or connecting it to the reverse node, depending on which setup it is. And do save your work, right? Whew.
So we kind of do the same. We connect it to visibility.
Yep, did the same with the other joints as well. So now with this set up and knocked out of the way, our IK and FK switch is technically built, right? If we start building controls on top of this, it'll still work on those joints, so we can start to do our classic addition of control curves.
You weren't supposed to disconnect the shoulder from.
This is where bonus tools comes in handy, but I'll go ahead and do the IK part first. Again, when you're looking at which one to work on,
This stuff goes into joint.
change this IK-FK switch and see which joint is grayed out or not grayed out in the outline. So right now I'm not in IK mode because my IK shoulder is grayed out, right? So if I'm going to build an IK control, make sure that you have it set to the correct mode first. So now my FK shoulder is hidden, my IK shoulder is visible. When I start to build my IK controls on this, I'll actually see it. Whew. I'm gonna keep a copy of this. So next up, like we did with our previous assignments, right? On this IK chain itself, we're gonna go ahead and create an IK handle on it. But if you recall how that setup works, then you'll need to do a set preferred angle first. So you need to bend your IK shoulder in the way that you think it should bend. In this case, I'll probably just need to bend my elbow in 90 degrees. So I'll go ahead and do that. I'll grab my IK elbow, rotate it to negative 90 degrees on Y. That looks like the way that I want it to go. Also, I prefer an angle on it. So I'll hold down right mouse, come over to set preferred angle, and release. Don't Control Z because that will undo our work. Go ahead and use your channel box to set it back to its original resting position. And then we can create an IK handle inside here, right? As a reminder, it's a couple of different ways. You can grab that Create IK Handle tool here, or you can go up to Skeleton, down to Create IK Handle. Again, because these joints are visible in the viewport, I might just manually go to the outliner and set up my IK handle that way. So after you first enter your tool, just select the first joint in your IK chain, IK shoulder. Hold down the Control key and click on that last joint in your chain, and it should slap on an effector and an IK handle for you. And then we can double check and see how our work is. I'll grab my IK handle tool, 2, just wiggle it around. And it looks like I'm getting my classic IK deformation. You don't use Control Z to step back so it snaps back into place here. You can even move your IK FK switch, and you might notice there's a ever so slight pop between your IK and FK modes. That's okay, that's natural. That's just the rotations that have been added to your joints from your IK FK solvers.
How would it this again?
Hmm?
How would it this again? So you go to select the IK handle.
Yeah, so I made an IK handle on those IKs. What I was talking about just now is that if you change your switch, you might notice, like, especially if you look at my elbow, it moves like just a little bit. That's okay. That's just another good way to check and make sure that your switch is working. So after you create that IK handle on your IK shoulder and wrist, it should be set up and good to go. So I got IK control set up. We can go ahead and do some review and slap on a control of our choice to the hand here for our IK control. Oh, before we go much further, actually, go ahead and rename your IK handle while we're at it. With my LT IK arm CTO.
CTL or a handle?
You ready? HTL for hand. We'll be building a CTL in just a moment, so I might save the CTLs for that instead. Good looking out. Cool. Our handle is in place. Let's go ahead and create a control for it. Again, the way this is going to work is we're going to create a control curve, snap it to our wrist, align it, and then we can set up our constraints that we would expect. So I'll go ahead and create a curve of my choice. I'll use BS curves to grab something. For me, I really like having either a box around the hand or a cross shape for the IK handle. For this one, I'll do a box, sure. So I'll select box, hit origin. Got a lovely little box here. And again, remember that we'll probably have to like align this up a little bit, so I will throw it under its own group, position it, do that match transforms, and then make any tiny tweaks after that. This is with our prop rig and our other rig at this point, so hopefully you get the idea. My box selected, I'll go ahead and use Control G to group it. And again, as I'm placing this control, or this controller, I will use the group to actually move it around. Change to my move tool, and snap this up inside the wrist. And if those pesky joint or the pesky geometry is getting in the way, you can hide it. Now that it's in place, we'll go ahead and orient this. Not with a constraint, we'll just use that match transforms option to scoot the box and angle it so it's aligned with our wrist joint. As a reminder of how this works, you'll grab your group first. I'll probably grab my IK wrist through the outliner again because I don't want to accidentally grab my FK or my regular wrist. So I'll select the group first, control click my IK wrist. So I have the parent object and basically the thing that has the rotations that I want. I'll come up to the modify menu, down to match transformations and match rotations. Cool. And now it's aligned with the joint movement, right? So again, this just helps us kind of move it in place. And boxes are pretty common for IK controls. If you notice mine isn't pointing with the, oh man, I'm not goofed right here. I'm too late now. But if you notice mine is pointing with my wrist and not necessarily down the hand, that is because of the rotation axis here inside my joint. My box is aligned with that X rotation axis, not necessarily looking at the joint underneath it. That's life. Cool. I'll go ahead and rename this before I start doing some constraining. So I'll make this my LT IK arm. This time it's the CTO. And make the group that holds it our GRP. And then we can do our classic setups for the IK hand. And if you want to make any adjustments to your box, this is the place to do so. Like if you want to scale it up and down especially, you would do that here. I'm not gonna, I'm fine with this size of box because it's pretty well fitting my arm already. But we'll go ahead and parent constrain this to our IK hand. So you grab your CTL first, control click your handle last, and do a parent constraint. So now if we grab our hand and wiggle it back and forth, our IK controller is doing exactly what we think it would.
What did your parent constraint do again?
A parent constraint is to the IK handle. Did you have a question?
The control to the hand?
Yes, the CTL itself to the IK hand. But if we remember correctly, right, no matter how much I do, if I rotate this box, it won't actually rotate my kind of wrist with it. Sure, it's moving it just a bit because of how my IK handle behaves, but I'm not actually getting it to like orient and move the wrist. We do need to set up one last constraint here. We're going to orient constrain our control box to the IK wrist. And we want this to be part of the sort of control chain that's swapping in and out.
Whenever I move the box, it's not actually moving the wrist at all.
Are you using the, did you set up the parent constraint?
Yep, use parent constraints.
Let me see what's under your hand.
For your parent constraints.
So we select your parent constraint. Let's see what it started to. Left eye hand arm control. So it's this one down here. We can move that. Let's move it. So rotation is fine. What happens if you move it?
Okay.
Yeah, you're good. Yeah. The rotation won't work right now. We're gonna fix that post haste. So go ahead and orient constrain your CTL to that IK wrist. Not your original wrist. You'll again want this to swap out with our switch itself. So I will set up an orient constraint to the IK wrist. Grab your CTL first, your wrist last, and do an orient constraint. So now I should be able to grab my box, rotate it, and we'll move my arm
What?
entirely with it. Orient constraint specifically. Parent constraint will get really weird.
Wait, so what? We select the handle?
Hmm?
I get lost again, sorry.
Yeah, so you'll orient constrain this to the joint, not the handle. So orient constrain your IK arm control to your IK wrist.
Constraint orientation.
Mhm.
Gotcha.
Cool. Question over here?
Maybe it's out.
Yeah, what's up?
I think that did.
So if I make click. No.
The handle. Yeah. So let's see what happens if you rotation. So you're good to go. Yep, so.
So I make the constraint orientation, but it is not rotating as it should be. Right, you make the orientation, you select the box, and for some reason it's not moving the arm.
I'm guessing you're probably on. I bet your switch is set to IK mode or to FK mode. So grab your switch shape real quick and flip that to 1. And now if you rotate it, does it work?
Oh,
Yeah, so your switch is on a different mode. I will just double check and grab your move tool to make sure that your IK is moving the right arm. So you got them switched. In this case, go ahead and delete this orient constraint. We'll have to rename this later, but now go ahead and
I wanna make
delete
sure
that.
I didn't delete anything else, yeah.
Orient constrain your CTL here to your FK wrist, because we see here there's the IK effector under it, so your IK got linked to that one instead.
Okay, with parent, no,
Orient.
orient, right.
Okay.
So now if I make it to the box,
Move it all, which is good. So if you switch your your switch shape back here, if you switch it again, now it changes the whole thing.
oh, Okay, and also shoot the whole thing. Okay. You really can see how I work in this game.
Yeah. It's a good stretch.
All right, our IK box is in place. Our IK control for this side of the body is done.
Bless you.
Let's go ahead and I'll say let's make this so that this control will hide when we're in our FK mode. So again, right now, if you're in IK mode, you sort of need to be very critical and think about which number is in your switch. So right now, if my IK and FK is 1, you know, if I put this 1 into the visibility, visibility will, when it gets a value of 1, will be on, right? Kind of like binary. 0 is on, or 0 is off, and 1 is on. So if this is 1, I'll want to connect it to the visibility of my box directly, not using the reverse switch. So I'll go ahead and grab my IK arm group. I will middle mouse drag it or add it to my node editor. Ooh, you can see we're starting to get pretty complicated here, right? If you don't see it at a glance, you can hit the F key and it should jump your node editor to the node that you just brought in. And again, we'll just expand its list by clicking on that stack of pancakes a couple times, and we have visibility that we can link in. Again, I know my IKFK is set to 1, and I want this to be visible right now, so I'll link it directly from my IKFK switch into the visibility now. Now we can double check our work. Do IKFK on and off. Looks good to me. So it's set to 0 or FK mode. My IK control is invisible and it won't work even if I try to use it. But when I switch this back to 1, it does become visible. My control is here and it's working. And bam, we've changed the options for our IKFK switch. Again, you don't want the other system to be visible because you don't want your animators to get confused. All right. So that's kind of the tough part. The next part is what's very convenient about bonus tools, is that in theory, right, if we wanted to create some controls for the arms, we'd start to add our own curves, add a group, do that match transformations, do a parent constraint, and then our system is set up. However, we have bonus tools. Bonus tools will do this entire sort of setup for us with the click of a button.
Oh, sweet.
So go ahead and find your FK shoulder. I'll go ahead and open it up. And I'll just select all of them. And again, this is where bonus tools comes in handy. A very brief aside on bonus tools is that it's a number of features that frankly should be integrated into Maya already, but they made it separate for whatever reason. But there's no profit incentive because it's also free. What you doing, Autodesk? Anyways, it's a number of just very neat little tips and tricks and extra options for you to mess with. There's a really nice one for animation that lets you do a walk cycle and flip animations, but that's not what we're here for. Under our bonus tools menu, we'll look for the rigging side because we are riggers after all. And here at the bottom of our rigging menu, underneath control, there's a create circle control option. I'll go ahead and click that. And this will just straight up do all of that for us in one click.
What?
You can set a size. For me, it looks like 3 or 4 is a healthy size for the scale of my current model. The control type, you will want to do it as a parent constraint, not shape under transform. This does things a little bit differently, which we don't want to mess with. If we do the parent constraint method, it'll automatically add parent constraints. It'll automatically add offset groups for us, as well as create controls that are kind of named like what we have now. The sickle orientation should be set to X up. And then if you want to choose a pretty color for this, you can. I recommend for the left side to choose green. And go ahead and create circle with those selected. Wow, look at that. Heading over to our outliner, we have pretty much everything named as we'd like it to. We have the daisy chain already set up for us. So this bonus tools is a nice little way to get around Some of that pesky, more boring stuff. We've aligned our own controls a handful of times by now. You've eaten your vegetables, it's time for dessert. I will say it doesn't use the naming conventions that I'd like, so I'm going to do some quick replace options. So you can call them control offset and control curve when I use GRP and CTL, right? I'll grab the ones that need CTL, have it search for, control curve and replace with CTL. And then have it search for control offset and replace with GRP. But taking a look at this, right, you might want to grab one of these hoops and then wiggle it around. It's already created that option for us. And even looking here in the outliner again, we've got some nice little parent constraints, again, already created for us. So, yay. That's something that would have probably taken us a good, 5 to 7 minutes that we have saved thanks to bonus tools. Pretty much be using bonus tools for the rest of the semester for this button and this button alone, because it's kind of crazy. What's up?
I can't find the bonus.
Did you install it?
I'm pretty sure I installed it. It came with the skin one, right? With the NG
Was
or
it inside NG Skin Tools? It was just the same day that we did it. I know it was the site was down when we tried to install it the day that I wanted to.
I don't. If you want, I can wait. That's okay.
Yeah, I'll just double check.
Yeah.
Just make sure it's not at the top.
You say I have the SQ tool, but I don't found the bonus at the top.
Yeah, that was something separate that you'd have to download and install. So we can fix that at a different time.
Gotcha.
Ashton, is there a question back there?
Why is what's the benefit of an FK over an IK?
What's the benefit of an FK over an IK?
Because like the FK, you're only really able to orient.
Well, there are a number of different uses. It's really good for arms when you need to do extreme poses and pushing exaggeration if we're thinking about our 12 principles of animation. I can, I can take my IK so far, but my FK can push it really, really far, like to something silly. Because this parent constraint, you can also, if you want to, go stretchy, which I think is nice. So if you need to add some more exaggeration or appeal into your animation by altering it, or making a sleep paralysis demon, that also works. Yeah, it just allows a different type of control method. Most animators will probably default to IK, or at least me personally, I like IK for feet and FK for arms, because I tend to get just better poses out of FKs for arms. But yeah, you can get both. Justice, what's up?
So since we have two sets of controls like IK and FK, you can't it'd be bad if you move the arm with IK and then switch to FK and then change some stuff and move it with IK. Would it
Not necessarily.
break?
Hmm?
Or so the joints actually follow everywhere?
The joints are following where they, how do I describe this? The FK and IK joints are in separate places, but they'll remember those places wherever you pose them.
Okay.
And also, you can kind of get cute with it. So I real quick jump into IK and FK mode and it pops back and forth.
Okay, so you can't, it doesn't let you move your arm with IK a little bit and then change stuff with FK.
can.
And not flip back.
You can. It just, it gets a little bit weird. What you're talking about is IK FK blending. So if I set my value to something that it shouldn't be, like 0.5, I can actually do a little bit of both. Right, so IK is having a little bit of control over it, and FK is also having a little bit of control over it. Or I can set it to 0.2 to bias it one way or the other. But to prevent some snapping like that, your animator would just keyframe your IK and FK value, and it would smoothly transition between those two. Let me do that real quick. So it won't pop over if your animator is clever about where they put your keyframes, right? It can still slide kind of smoothly into that position. Yeah. Good question.
That's cool that you can actually find a way to flip it on the fly.
Yes, yeah, you can absolutely blend it. And what's up back there?
I might have missed it. What's the actual difference?
What's the difference between IK and FK? So inverse kinematics, the way that it works is that the child joined at the end of a chain will control the parents above it. So it will sort of create an auto bend for us Basically, the way that it works is that you move one joint, and it will try and maintain the bend and the distance between the joints automatically. FK allows us to kind of like action figure style, only move it one at a time down the hierarchy. If I move my wrist and try and move it around, it's not going to bend the whole elbow and shoulder with it, right? So just two different types of controls that I found very common in animation. Run a little low on time. Let's see here. I'm going to have to add a pull vector. Damn, that might be next time. I will go ahead and control the visibility of these IK or these FK controls as well. So if I turn my IK mode on, those will vanish. And if I turn it back off, they will come back. Again, we can just grab the visibility of the group that's holding this control. So I will find my FK shoulder group, pop open the node editor, and add it to my node editor. It's getting complicated in here, but if you can't find it when you hit that button again, hover over this node editor and F to jump to it. You can put it down here for some reason. And I believe for this one, if I take a look, my switch is currently set to 0. But the other day, my reverse node to change it to 1, so the visibility will be on for this switch mode. So it looks like I will grab the output X from my reverse and pump it into visibility on the other side. And then test my system here. Cool. So IK works on itself for one side. I can move it, pose it, do whatever I'd like. Switch it over to FK, I'll bend over into it. And I can pose this as I'd like. Nice. So now my animators have multiple choices here. Another benefit of using FK over IK is that you can get some really nice arcs in your stuff. So if I'm swinging a sword or throwing a ball, it might be a little bit easier for me to animate on FK mode versus IK mode. I'll go ahead and set these back to 0. And that's set up for one side. I will say one thing that I forgot about was to have us add a pull vector control to the IK on the other side. So we'll probably start our class on Wednesday by just adding that pull vector control behind the elbows, and we'll alter its visibility when we get back. But we are just about out of time, so that timing works out quite well. And the idea is you have two duplicate chains, you choose which one their parent is dynamically through the use of the node editor. That is sort of the key idea here at the heart of our switch. You can do this for legs, you can do this for spines if you want to. You got options. But for now, we're out of time, so y'all can scrap and get out of here if you'd like to. Question back here. Yes, we'll do that on Wednesday as well, so we'll
No question about what we talked early. It's not a question. It's about what we talked early for tomorrow. I don't know if you have time right now.
Yeah, let's figure out a time real quick.
I just realized why I didn't have it. As I uninstalled everything, I forgot to install the one tool. Yeah.
Looks like I have time. Am I going to sit for the time? Is that what you have?
As far as I thought you said fixed, I didn't know for I would try.
I got negative Tuesday.
Really? Between one of my homework and your I would try to make the foods, all the food handles and the general row handle for everything again. I will look up and use the how to install for that row.
Yeah, we have a tutorial for that.
So
I mean, for the front one, yeah, but for the general row control,
probably be how much
I don't think we set up the full control for like these.
Oh, never mind, never mind. As I saw in the tutorial, I was like, wait,
I need to try that.
I don't know.
That's an old version where I set that up first, but I saved up to don't worry about it, just
Yes, I will do that.
you guys
Look
both
up
start
because I
with it,
just
and
wanna
then
do your
and
stuff,
it's,
but I was trying to put this out. I haven't done with the roots. I really lazy. I was really
it is like different.
Oh yeah, we keep on.
maybe submit it as long as the semester's not out, so I'm not too bad.
I just want to bring everything.
It's nice to have it be done.
Yeah. Thank you for your patience. I've been reading and struggling a lot the last few weeks.
But we've got an hour aside for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I will need it. I will finish with the bonus rig now because I installed the tool, but I didn't make the control. I will finish with that. Thank you. Gotta go. I gotta study.
Everybody working. Good luck. See you tomorrow.
Reason I know.
I put like 150